let's start that over. 2024 started with a bang with all new information on Epstein and his clients. But what will happen as the year continues? Stay tuned for our 2024 predictions, theoretical catastrophes, and more. So let's get into it. Welcome to the 18th episode of the Magnifying podcast. I am your host, Elena Moore, and today I am joined by none other than the American Stoic. Today we are going through some of our 2024 predictions, and while this might not be our entire list, as it took us a little while to get it cut down to where we needed it to be, or Liam just telling me I can't do what I want to do, we're going to continue into some of the highlights of what we think will be happening not only in the election year, but within the year total. So let's start it off with something hard-hitting, something you may have never seen coming, which is possibly a new war, maybe.
It's amazing. I mean, it's so out of character for the U.S. government to want to start a new war. You're right. Nobody ever saw this coming. And it's sad because of all of the implications it has, both for U.S. service members, for the U.S. taxpayer, for the native populations of wherever there's going to be the next incursion by U.S. armed forces, because it never goes well. It always creates a power vacuum, destabilizes the region. And so, it's not surprising, but it is disappointing. And I think there's no better kind of emblem for the U.S. Foreign policy than John Bolton, who obviously was ambassador, former national security advisor, and he said that the U.S. cannot afford to take a reactionary position towards Iran, which basically means that the United States needs to strike Iran first before Iran is able to do anything themselves. And the justification for that is, of course, that Iran supports Hamas, and so therefore, given the actions of Hamas, the U.S. needs to act and strike against Iran.
Yep, and Lindsey Graham already proffered that one out there in the beginning of the Israel-Palestine or Hamas, whatever you want to call it, crisis, saying that, we need to bomb Iran. Because he's always looking for the next conflict. In 2022, we had Ukraine. In 2023, we had the start of the Israel-Hamas stuff. And what's going to be for 2024? Most likely, Iran.
Yeah. And I mean, it's that whole region is just printed money for the military-industrial complex for the last 25 years. And
why would you give up on a cash cow that just continues giving you cash?
Yeah, I can't remember. There's a comedian, and he had a famous line. He said, "I'll stop beating that dead horse when it stops spitting out money." And it's basically the approach that the U.S. military-industrial complex has had.
I think that's the best way you can sum it up.
Yeah, look, money makes the world go round. And even Eisenhower, going back to the 50s, said, warned the American people, what did he warn them of? Not politicians and corruption necessarily, and not a foreign adversary or a foreign country or Russia, as the Cold War was getting kicked off. No, what he warned about was the military-industrial complex. And so, you see people like John Bolton and Lindsey Graham, and they're out trying to sell the next war. And I will say it is kind of, it's a little bit inspiring to see a little bit more pushback. I feel like for so many decades, the average United States citizen was much more open to being manipulated into a war, into some type of foreign conflict, even if it wasn't boots on the ground. And you saw a lot of that with Obama, where you would have a lot of sorties and bombing missions and a lot of cyber attacks and all of that. But I think, and I say this with a little bit of caution, but I think that the average U.S. citizen is a little bit more skeptical now of the U.S. federal government trying to sell them a new war. So we'll see how that goes in 24. I don't think John Bolton's very popular. I don't think his statements and the statements of Lindsey Graham are getting the play in the press that they would have 10 years ago.
Right.
I think that 10 years ago it would have been a lot easier to sell this war. So we'll see if that continues. Maybe there'll be more false flag operations needed to kind of convince the American people, which again would not be surprised about.
Right.
But
we're
right
kind
now,
of due for another, 911 situation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's definitely going to definitely going to take more to get public sentiment on the side of U.S. boots on the ground in Iran. But we'll see. Again, anything's possible.
But the beauty of all of this is that we're in election year. So if you think nothing's going to happen, I would say this is probably the year of all years that the world will burn just a little bit more, at least in the U.S.
Oh, it's going to get jiggy with it for sure.
Oh, absolutely. You thought 2020 was bad. Please, we are just getting started. That was the test year. So what's the number one thing that we may see happening? I think it's probably pretty obvious. Is more terrorist attack spikes. We're a little due for that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because that was such a prominent part of American life, I feel like, in leading up to 2020, all throughout Trump's presidency, basically, and starting at really the end of the Obama administration. You had places like San Bernardino and things like that. And you also have to consider the fact that how open has the border been since Biden took office? How many encounters have you had at the southern border since August of last year? So about 4 or 5 months now. There have been more encounters at the southern border recorded by Customs and Border Patrol and ICE than there have been natural births in the United States over that same period of time. And again, most of these people are getting released. They have a court date in 12 years, right? They say, all right, show up to this courthouse in 12 years, so, 2035, and please come back at that time, and then we'll address whether or not you can stay after they've been here for 12 years. And of course, part of that argument is that once they've been here for 12 years, they've quote-unquote established a life, and they can make that argument to the judge, and then it adds more validity to their case of staying. So again, it's all a scam. But you also have to consider the numbers of people on the terror watch list coming in, the people that are sneaking in through the cartel pathways, that are not ever being interacting with Customs and Border Patrol, that we have no idea or even hear. And so the risk, the potential risk of terror attacks has gone up astronomically in the last 3 years. And so I would be shocked if we do not see at least a few between now and November.
Exactly. I think that would be a big push for both the Democrats and the Republicans to push for their side. Oh, you need our candidate as the next president in order to, basically get rid of ISIS again. Obviously insert something different than ISIS into that sentence, but the same idea.
Yeah, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, any of them. They have a stake in this too, right? Because if the Taliban or the cartel in Mexico or somewhere in South America, they all have a vested interest in having ease of access to the United States, whether it's for drug trafficking, whether it's for human trafficking. Like there's all these different reasons that these different groups, terrorist groups, cartels, whatever you want to call them, would want to have an ease of access, an open border basically. And so if they think that they can even influence the election by maybe launching attacks in red states, maybe kind of trying to scare the population in red states to try and lower voter turnout or whatever they think, it's a business decision for them also at that point. And obviously this administration is not going to go out of their way to protect American citizens. Heaven forbid that they maybe interfere with the human right of movement of people from Senegal to climb through the border fence. I mean, heaven forbid if that decreases the risk of a terror attack or decreases the amount of Americans being killed by illegals every day or decreases the amount of Americans being killed by fentanyl every day. I mean, there's clearly going to be no effort from the administration to stop this.
Right.
And so you just have to think about...
Well, it's not in their benefit.
Motive means an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
You have a motive, you have means, and you have opportunity.
Got to get those ballots somehow. Yep. So with that in mind, another prediction that we have is the continuing to deplete gas reserves until the election, because that's something that we thought we were going to see a lot of when Biden got in was, we were going to have the increase in gas, which we did see. But when he started getting, when the Biden administration started receiving more pushback, then they switched from buying it from Saudi Arabia to depleting our gas reserves, which we can also thank Trump for. And now we can thank Biden for probably having nothing left in those by the end of by the time the election rolls around. So most likely we're thinking that those prices will skyrocket right after the election. If Trump's in, then it's going to be, oh wow, Trump is raising gas prices, or Biden gets in, it was, oh, we need him to save us. If he's the Democrat nominee and that's a Republican nominee. That's all up for debate, obviously. But it does look to be where the tide is turning.
Over 2022, the Biden administration sold 180 million barrels over a 6-month period from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
They sold
and that was, again, after Russia... after Russia, the whole Russia-Ukraine thing started to unfold, this was an attempt to try and curb the prices, since we were no longer going to be getting Russian oil. Now, there's a whole scandal in there too,
right?
Because some of that Strategic Petroleum Reserve that was sold was actually sold to Chinese companies that had ties to Hunter Biden.
No.
But I do not want to get into. I don't want to get into that, obviously, because I'll just take us down a whole other side quest that we don't have time for. Again, this was already a whole process to try and get this episode down to a manageable time. But and that process has continued. Obviously, you know, the ban on Russian oil has continued. The need to prop up prices, or I guess artificially keep prices down, because they've limited domestic production so strongly through all of their environmental regulations and red tape and everything, this administration. So there's been a basically just an open faucet running out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And I believe it was like 3 or 4 days ago, they announced that they are going to, they had just bought 13 million barrels. And I think that it accounts for something like 10% of what was used last year. So they're making an effort, but
right.
It's a drop in the bucket, quite literally, of what they have used just for political purposes. Again, this has all been for political purposes. And again, following a motion by Trump in 2019 to fill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at a fraction of the price of what it would cost now. And it was blocked by Democrats in the House.
Right.
The government and this administration in particular, and the Democrats in particular, have screwed the American people on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve probably 4 or 5 times over the last 5 years.
At least.
And now they're using it for political purposes to misguide those same people to try and squeeze out another term from this incompetent administration.
Well, you know, inflation has never been lower. The turkey prices, the egg prices, they've never been lower. $6 is a steal.
Yeah, did you know that the average 4th of July barbecue was 14 cents lower in 2021? That's incredible. 14 cents lower.
That's what we need to run back. I want to see that again. It's really pocketing my bank account right now.
Yeah. Ignore the fact that you're paying double for gas,
right?
Double for eggs.
You can't even get your Russian vodka anymore. So, I mean, what's the point?
No.
All right, so another one, I really see this one happening, is an increase in controlled brownouts and blackouts. I could definitely see it happening during the summer right before the 2024 election, because obviously we're going to see an insurgence of BLM. We're obviously going to see more school shootings and other things like that, because, you know, some type of crisis and things need to be happening in the U.S. so we have more gun control. There's this huge outcry for climate change against police brutality and a bunch of other things like that. That's always hot topic issues every 4 years, coincidentally. So I think one way that they're going to probably keep pushing that is after, you know, there's some red flag that happens with shootings, BLM, etc. I could definitely see riots happening and then increase controlled brownouts and blackouts after that. One of the reasons this would happen is you see this gigantic push from Biden, red states and blue states to go more onto an electric grid. We see it a lot in South Carolina. It's something I've been covering for a very long time, a push to electric vehicles, going all electric and smart. But one way they're able to do that is to control the energy that people are using. Therefore, they can have more controlled brownouts and blackouts. We've seen it in Texas during the winter. We've seen it in California during the summer. I think we're going to be seeing this a lot more regularly the more these states move over to an electric way of living, which, you know, will, I'm sure, just make everything else so happy during the summer. So we'll see.
Following your kind of proposed timeline here of you have some type of false flag, some type of incident that would get the left wing riled up. At probably the police
Right.
is kind of the way it's gone before, and I would assume kind of the way it would go again, because it's, if it's not broke, don't fix
It worked last
So
time.
just keep running it. Exactly. So if they're in the middle of that, right, and then all of a sudden the government starts, oh, we need to have rolling blackouts or brownouts or whatever, then it's obviously going to kind of inflame those tensions even more, get people more worked up. People would be more upset. People would use that, obviously, to probably parlay into how capitalism's terrible. Knowing left-wing protesters, that would probably become a byline in their in their protests. And so I would not at all be surprised by that. Again, and that's not even considering just the weakness of quote-unquote renewable
Right.
energies and what they have on the grid. And we saw this in the winter a year or two ago in Texas, where all of the solar panels and all of the wind farms just basically shut down, and so you had coal and nuclear trying to work overtime to make up for the difference. And there's obviously a lot of chance of that happening. Whether it's a cyber attack on the grid, whether it's some extreme weather. We don't really know what the durability of these renewable energy sources is, and how that could contribute to blackouts and brownouts as well.
And
So it could come from a lot of different directions.
And
too.
one of the biggest pushes that they have had in 2023 was closing down coal plants and a call for closing down nuclear plants as well. So that way you would have nothing to fall back on if these electric ways of renewable energy end up not working. I know that they saw, I believe it was Virginia, they closed down a coal plant up there. I may have the wrong state, but they closed down a coal plant, and then a little bit later they went into a blackout. I mean, it did not last long.
Yeah, and again, it just kind of gives the cover for the excuse.
Right.
Is basically what it does.
All right, so let's pivot a little bit into something a little bit more interesting, because we've talked a lot about politics, and we will be coming back to it. Don't you worry. But what is going to happen with culture? We talked a lot about who we were going to talk about, which cultural figure we were going to dive into, and I think it is very fitting that we chose Taylor Swift, because we have heard so much about the Swiftie overtake online, in person, over the airwaves. It has been so nauseating. But we think that Taylor Swift may start officially campaign stumping for the Biden campaign if he's the chosen nominee, or whoever else is chosen as the Democrat. And there's bonus points if she starts crying while she's talking about women's rights on stage. And I feel like we should give extra bonus points if it's in Tennessee, her home state, where Marsha Blackburn is, who she hates with a passion.
I'm tired of Taylor Swift, okay? And I'm tired of Taylor Swift as a musician, as a cultural figure, as part of the football scene. And so I think it was last night, or maybe the day before, whenever the Golden Globes happened, and Joe Coy had the joke of the big difference between the Golden Globes and the NFL is that the Golden Globes, they have fewer shots of Taylor Swift, and she did not like that joke. We'll put her reaction up on screen just so that you can see the daggers that she was giving Joe Coy for that joke. But either way, you can't argue with the fact that there has been a concerted effort to put her in the limelight of American culture over the last year. Obviously, her tour was huge. The movie that came out dating Travis Kelce, and then obviously he got paid, like, I think it was $20 million for the Pfizer ad. But leaving that aside, just kind of focusing on her for the time being, you have built up the prestige, the relevance that she holds. Right. And so why? Yeah. Right? There kind of has to be a reason for that, I would think. She's been, publicly in beefing with George Soros, or one of his companies that bought the rights to her music, and that's why she's been doing the whole Taylor's version of Everything I Know.
Yeah,
but
I call BS on that one.
The payoff has to be. It's just that's very confusing. I don't know. I don't know enough about her or her music to care, but I do think that it's pretty obvious that there's some end game, and I think that I would be shocked. I would be personally very shocked if I do not see before the end of the year Taylor Swift on stage with the Democratic presidential nominee. Yeah. I think that would be a very surprising twist if that does not happen because of the effort.
Is she still on tour, or is she touring in 2024? Or was that 2023? Because I remember seeing how wherever she was going to, at what times during the year, went alongside and coincided with voting days or something like that.
Interesting. No, she's on an international tour right now. So I think her American leg of her tour is done. So she's in Tokyo, and then she's going to Australia, and then she's doing Europe. Let's see, when does her tour end exactly? And then, because again, you have to get through the primary process too for the Democrats before you can really start to leverage, quote unquote, A-list talent. That would be and then she's back in the United States at the end of next year, starting 3 weeks before the election.
Oh.
She's back in the United States.
That's so convenient.
Isn't it?
What?
So first show back is October 18th in Miami.
There it goes. That is what I was talking about. Yes, so I definitely see her, I could definitely see that happening. My money's on that one, I really think. But as we kind of shift from that, let's talk a little bit about our prediction for election results, which is difficult to do. So, don't hold it against us. But we're just going to talk through it real quick. Liam, let's start off. What do you think is going to happen right before the election, during the election, after the election? Just kind of give us a short little rundown.
Oh, man. So again, and this is very, very difficult to do just because there are so many things that we don't know, right? You'd assume there would be another Trump versus Biden. Obviously, Trump's going to win the Republican primary, regardless of, the Democrats won't be able to stop that. We'll see what I imagine the Supreme Court will strike down any attempts to keep Trump or Biden off of the ballot, because there has been talk in red states now about attorney generals and state legislatures in those states coming back and taking Biden off the ballot. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's really going to be an issue. I think the Supreme Court will kind of iron that one out. And so I imagine we're going to see another Trump versus Biden ticket, and don't see a world where Trump does not continue to draw the biggest crowds ever seen in political rallies. And I don't see a world where Biden does as many rallies as he did last time around, which was not very many, if you do remember. And the ones that he did attend had 3-foot circles around 20 little chairs in somebody's backyard, and then half of the chairs were full, so you had 10 people show up. And I think it's pretty clear what that means. I think everybody who saw those pictures of here's one candidate's rally, here's who showed up to see this candidate, and here's who showed up to see this candidate in the same state, around the same time, which one do you think is going to win the election? Now the question is, why did that not play out? And in an effort to try and remain on this platform, I'm going to be very, very careful with what I say. I think that it is most likely going to play out the same way. I would be shocked if Trump does not get 80 million votes and lose to a guy who could not draw 15 people in a swing state. Are you
telling me there may be FRAUD?
I don't like that word. But what I will say is there might be some shenanigans. And I'll go one step further. I think it's largely the Republicans' fault. And I think it's largely Trump's fault, because I think that there has not been, I'll say enough, but really anything is really kind of where my head's at. Anything done to stop it.
You mean fraud?
Obviously, having an election.
Preventing.
How do I put this? Ensuring that everybody believes the results. I don't think that enough has been done by the RNC, by Ronna McDaniel, by state legislatures, or by the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars raised by Trump, to actually...
I mean, all you can really do at this point is try and put your finger on the scales, if possible, which is how I kind of perceive him being buddies with establishment is what he's trying to do there.
Well, I mean, again, you were there at the rally in South Carolina when he brought Lindsey Graham out. right? And so you kind of have. I understand it's politics. You kind of have
Right.
to play both sides. You kind of have to make some compromises and things like that. And I'm not at all mad or upset about that. I'm a realist. Like
Right.
that's how politics works. You have to. However, I think that it might have gone a little bit too far, and because we spent so much time trying to actually play
Right.
buddy buddy with everybody on on our side of the aisle that disagrees with us, and on the other side of the aisle, and with people in the media and everything like that, there has not been the focus that there should have been on fixing the root cause of the thing that he complains about at every rally.
Yeah,
If
and
that
one
makes any
thing,
sense.
that I did see at the rallies that I've been to in South Carolina, which has been a lot this year, is the push for bank your vote. That's Ronna McDaniel's and Drew McKissick's latest thing that they're pushing super duper hard, especially in South Carolina, is this whole bank your vote. So I would not be surprised if we see something as in I think Rona's going to be moved eventually. I think she's going to either be forced to resign or just resign out of embarrassment after the 2024 election, and you're going to see Drew McKissick step up to that plate as interim and eventually just stay in that position. And I think a lot of it's
Meet your new boss,
right, the
same as the
one
old
that
boss.
I've been having to deal with, and everybody else in South Carolina. Trust me, bank your vote's not new. It's pretty much, something that we've seen very similar used as a test site here. So it's a little frustrating, but I could see that also being a result of even more distrust for the RNC and the GOP, and also play into, kind of how it will compromise Republicans even more. If you thought you trust the Republicans a little bit more than the Democrats, I have a feeling at the end of this year it's going to get worse.
I couldn't agree more. I don't think that people who have had faith, I guess, in the party, I don't think that's going to go well. And I think, and I hope I'm wrong. And again, this is not me, being a doomer gloomer. This is just, if I had to put money on the way that 2024 goes, I would be. This is what I would do. This is where I put my money. And so we'll see. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and then, and it's an election year. And as people know, election years
Mm-hmm.
move faster. More happens in election year. The news cycle is faster. More stuff happens. More stuff happens, especially outside of the news cycle. Even so, look at the news on the weekends, because anything that they don't want you to know about is going to happen late on a
Friday
Friday.
after
It's
5
basically a good rule of
every
thumb.
time.
Yeah, every time. So just kind of, it's going to be a very busy year, and so we'll obviously do our best to stay on top of everything that happens, and keep you guys in the know. But it's definitely going to take a lot from people in
Mm-hmm.
the field working on these campaigns, working with state legislatures. Obviously, the Supreme Court's going to have to come through on a few things probably before the end. Not just this, but I'd be surprised if a couple of different issues with the election don't get run up to the Supreme
Right.
Court between now and November. And so it's going to be a very, very busy year. But, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, if I had to put money on it right now, I think that there might be a little bit of shenanigans happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see another candidate that was overwhelmingly popular in every state that he visited
Yeah,
not
and
get the win.
that is not just happening on the presidential level. We're seeing it on the state level in South Carolina with the Freedom Caucus. They all have challengers, whether or not you like them, and there's a huge push with millions and millions of dollars, possibly even billions, on state level, going after the very few good people in politics. So if you haven't decided to get involved
Yep.
now, this might be your last chance if you would like to save your country. Just saying.
Yeah, and it all starts
Yeah.
at the state level. And so the reason that I think that we have not done
Mm-hmm.
enough to have a good federal election is because of the state level. I don't think that the states have done enough to secure their own systems, to secure their own process, to clarify what their process is, to make sure that people in their states and across the country who might, after the election and ballots are being counted for 2 or 3 weeks after the election day,
Right.
people start to have questions, and it does matter. And so hopefully, we don't run into the same issues we ran into. Hopefully, all the ballots get counted the night of the election. There's no reason they shouldn't. In Florida, everybody uses a paper ballot, and all the results are in by 10 p.m. And so there's no reason that states with 1/10 our population cannot do the exact same thing.
So if you're ever interested in getting involved and you don't know where to start, don't have anybody that you trust, you can always email us at the magnifyingglasspodcast@gmail.com. You can also see it at the end of our podcast. We'll put a slide up for that one. You can also check in the description for it as well. But thank you so much for joining us today on the Magnifying Glass podcast. We delve deep, bringing the overlooked into focus and magnifying the stories that matter to you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and share, helping us shine a light on even more discoveries. I'm your host, Elena Moore, and remember, sometimes the smallest details make the biggest difference. Until next time, keep looking closer.